going to read from Mark chapter 5. It wasn't intended, but it seems that we're kind of going through a couple chapters of Mark as we look at the life and ministry of Jesus. But we come to chapter 5, and we're going to start at verse 21 today. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And, actually, there's going to be such a long section until verse 43 that I'm just going to go section by section a little bit today, just to, so that I'm not reading like 20 verses right now. But verse 21, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." And Jesus went with him. We'll just stop there for now. As we continue on this series on kind of the life and ministry of Jesus, kind of trying to better understand what it is, who it is that we're trying to follow and imitate and to become a disciple of. We see today, Jesus is spending a lot of time. So he was at Capernaum, and as he was crossing over in chapter 4, he's crossing over the lake, the Sea of Galilee, and then they were met by that furious storm, right? The boat is just rocking, water's coming in. The disciples are thinking they're going to die, and Jesus is sleeping. So they kind of are just, dumbfounded, and they're like, how can you sleep in a situation like this? Jesus, don't you care if we drown and die? He gets up, kind of just looks at the disciples. It's like, why do you still have no faith? And with 3 words, quiet, be still, he calms the wind and the waves. And then they make it all the way to the other side of the lake. And we looked at this a couple of weeks ago. As soon as Jesus lands, that demon-possessed guy comes running down from the tombs, falls in front of Jesus, and they have the interaction where he kind of casts the demons out, the legion of demons, into the pigs. Pigs go rushing down. And the people are saying, hey, please, leave. So he gets in the boat and he crosses back over. Most likely he's back at Capernaum, because that's where the story takes place today. So once again, he returns back to Capernaum. The crowd sees Jesus, and they come rushing. And so that's the scene that we see in verse 21. He has come back. We see that he has power. He had demonstrated power over Mother Nature, the wind and the waves, over the demons. He's going to heal today as well, but he's also going to demonstrate that he has power and authority over death, as we see a story of Jairus and his daughter. A father is frantically searching for treatments, medications, anything that will make his sick daughter well. He tries everything, but his little girl is dying. She's not getting better, and she is suffering. So as he's in the midst of this, as he's going through this, he hears, hey, Jesus has come back. He puts everything down and he runs down to the shore. So as he's getting down there, he races towards to the Sea of Galilee along the coast. And as he approaches the shore where the boat would have docked, just crowds are all around him. And so he's fighting through the crowds, trying to get to Jesus, pushing and shoving his way through until he sees or he finds Jesus, and he throws himself at Jesus' feet. And he says, my daughter is dying. Come, put your hands on her so that she may be saved. My little daughter is dying. Come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. This can also read as, my little daughter is at the point of death. Okay? My daughter is at the point of death. They were faced with the fear. His fear was that she would die. And that fear caused him to seek out Jesus. He pleaded with him earnestly, which can be translated, he literally begged him And this word is the same word that we see on the other side of the lake when the demon-possessed man, or the demons himself, begged Jesus to not send them out of that area. It's the same word. So the NIV has it translated as he pleaded, but it's literally he begged him. The picture is that a father is at the feet of Jesus, begging him, will you please come? Come back with me to save my daughter. Who is Jairus? We are told that he was a synagogue leader, or in some of your translations, it might say synagogue ruler. Basically, he was responsible for the physical synagogue, the maintenance of the synagogue, as well as the worship services that took place each week, and maybe the schools that were going on. So he was basically a caretaker of the synagogue, or local synagogue. He might have been in charge of operations, administration. It's that kind of a role. Okay? He was not a teacher or a Pharisee, but he simply took care of it. And I find it very interesting that he comes and falls in front of Jesus, or falls on his knees in front of Jesus. Now, I said that he was not a Pharisee. Okay? So we don't know what synagogue leaders, what their views are towards Jesus, but they definitely had a close association with the Pharisees. So most scholars believe that it's not out of the question to assume that many of the synagogue rulers, because of their close association with the Pharisees, would never publicly say, oh, we side or we agree with Jesus. Because if they did that, they would be out of a job. The Pharisees would simply come and remove them from their post. So most scholars will believe, hey, this was a very unusual circumstance, a picture that you wouldn't see very often. One of the synagogue leaders coming and falling in front of Jesus, begging and pleading. Why? Because he was in a moment of desperation. His daughter was literally at the point of death. So for Jairus to think this way, it's pretty significant. And I think it shows the condition that he was in, the desperation. There's confidence also in his request. Because he says, come, please come and put your hands on her, on my daughter, so that she will be healed and live. There's a confidence in his voice. He doesn't speak in a way of like, if you come, maybe she will be healed. It's come, touch her, put your hands on her, and I know that she will be healed and she will live. So there's this confidence that he expects Jesus to be able to do what he is requesting. According to Luke chapter 8, verse 42, when Luke tells us this account, he gives us one little detail that Mark actually does not include, which is this was his only daughter. So he doesn't want to definitely lose her. And Jesus agrees to go with him. His daughter was suffering. And because his daughter is suffering, he was suffering. But in this story, as we continue to read, there's also another person who is suffering. And her story is kind of sandwiched in the middle of this story. And her story kind of begins in verse 25. So as Jesus agrees to go with him, a large crowd, they followed and they pressed around Jesus. In verse 25, a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak or his clothes, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Here we see a story of a woman. She had been suffering for 12 years. Continual bleeding. The nature of her bleeding was probably some kind of a menstrual type of a thing. So continuously bleeding. Or some scholars believe it might have been some kind of an infection, a uterine infection or something. But it's a condition that she was bleeding for 12 years. When we lose blood in our bodies replenish that blood, but it takes time. And when you lose it, you get fatigued and you get tired. Not to mention all of the other health risks that come with that. 12 years she's suffering. I don't know if any of us have suffered in any condition for 12 years. My last knee operation was 2010. So that's 6 years ago. That was my 4th operation. Yeah, I have no cartilage basically on my right side of my knee. And so 2010, just before Timothy was born, I was in the hospital getting my 4th operation. But 6 years. But my first knee operation, I had it in 1990. How many years is that? 26 years ago. More than half my life, over half my life, I've had this chronic knee pain where I had multiple surgeries. But I still walk and I can do things that I still do. But this woman, 12 years of suffering, in a condition that we need to explore a little bit here, but a condition that caused her actually to be an outcast from society. She had this incurable condition that not just caused her physical suffering, but it was also an emotional, social, and relational. Her condition actually made her ritually unclean. If you look at Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25 through 27, at the end of that section, it's one of the Leviticus, the laws that kind of portrays, kind of communicates what makes a person clean or unclean. In Leviticus 25, it's talking about a woman's basically period. Okay, when a woman is on her period, she's considered unclean, and there's all of these things that happen. But in verse 27, basically, anyone who touches them, or the woman who is bleeding, will be unclean. They must wash their clothes, bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. There were these rules that were set aside, that when a person came into contact with someone who was bleeding, it made them unclean until evening, a period of time that they were kind of to be put aside. They were required to bathe, wash their clothes, and so forth. So this woman, for 12 years, she's suffering from this condition. It made her basically ritually unclean. She could not have any interaction with anyone. It is just like a leper who, when they come into contact with somebody, that person will be considered unclean, not to mention possible risk, right, of that being transferred. She could not be near anyone. She couldn't go anywhere. So if you understand that such condition and see what she did to go through the crowd, then we see actually, once again, the condition or the desperation that she was facing. We're told that she exhausted all of the medical resources and options. And in the process, they drained all of her money. She used everything she had to try to find a cure. Instead of getting better, she grew worse. And this is where we see her faith. She makes her way through the crowd and she wants to find Jesus. She wants to reach out to Jesus for one reason. I don't need his attention. I just need to touch his clothes. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And we see the faith of this woman. So she fights through the crowd. She makes her way towards Jesus. I feel like she kind of came from behind. She wasn't out to get his attention. She wasn't out to stop him. She just wanted to get close enough to just touch his clothes. She basically made a bunch of people unclean. Because all these people were pressing around Jesus, we're told. She's fighting their way through. Look at the similarities. Jairus also had to do this too. He was fighting through the crowd to get to Jesus. This woman is fighting through the crowd to get to Jesus. They both have a request to make. They're both suffering. She made a bunch of people unclean on the way. Because she has no choice. So many people are crowding Jesus. She has to kind of, excuse her way or kind of push her way through and then to touch. She succeeds in getting to Jesus. She touches him, and immediately she is healed. And these are one of the action words that Mark's gospel is filled with, immediately. She felt in her body right away. She knew that her bleeding, that her condition was cured. It was almost instantaneous, and it was immediate. And she knew right away that she was healed. Let's pick it up, verse 30. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples are thinking, you see the people crowding all around you, and yet you can ask, "Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Why did she tremble with fear? Well, I think one reason is in her condition, she should not have done what she just did, touching all those people. So maybe she was afraid of the consequence. Maybe people, maybe even Jesus might have been, "You're unclean. How can you you risk getting all of these people unclean by running through the crowd? You should have just gotten my attention." Second thing is, I don't know if she understood how Jesus would respond. All she wanted to do was touch and get away. But when Jesus actually stopped and he was calling out for who touched, she was like, "Oh no, I just kept him from going to where he wanted to go or where he was going." That fear aspect, I think, is, when someone's in a hurry and you stop them and something happens, bad happens, what happens to you? You live with that for a long time, right? That's kind of what's going to happen here too. But the fear is like interrupting somebody that's very important. If you were to do something and interrupt President Obama's motorcade, well, first of all, you would have to be something serious and significant. If he doesn't come to Portland as much, but when I was in California, I don't know how many trips he came to California. Every time he came, traffic, just people are like, "Why are you here again?" He came at least 20 to 30 times in the last several years. Each time he comes, traffic is, they basically shut down freeways so that his motorcade can go through the city. And because of that, people said, "Can we transport him any other way?" So they used a helicopter at some points as well, just land in the middle of the freeway. He would get in, and then they would take him. And so either way, freeways are shut down. But if someone significant or important like that is on their way to somewhere and you interrupt them, and they stop and say, "Well, who is the cause of this interruption?" You might get a little afraid. And so I don't think she's like afraid of what she did, but maybe fearful in the sense that she has caused a delay in someone that's significant. Because in her, she's thinking of herself as probably someone that's not as high up on this social ladder. And she sees Jesus as at least equal to one of the teachers, but probably greater than that. I don't know if she saw Jesus as necessarily the Son of God, but she knew that he had the power to heal, which is why she sought after him. Okay? But she's trembling with fear. And he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go and be free from your suffering. One touch felt different to Jesus. One touch was unlike all the others. We're told that he realized that power had gone out from him. This is, every time I read this section, power had gone out from him. Jesus doesn't even need to be conscious, he knows, but he doesn't need to be initiating the healing. In faith, that woman reached out and she was healed. And in that moment, power came out of him. Power came out of him and it healed. And so he stops, he turns around and he says, who touched me? Jesus, all these people are touching you. All of them. It was me, it was Peter, it was John. It was them, all of these people. Jesus, all of these people touched you. How can you ask who touched you? It was everybody. That's what the disciples are thinking. The woman, the way I see this happening, she touched and she stopped and people just continued on, right? And she's like, I'm healed. And in that moment of shock, as she is sitting there, as the crowd just kind of passes by her, all of a sudden, she hears, who touched me? That's kind of what I see kind of happening. And so by the time that Jesus stops, I think she was quite a ways away. But she hears, and she can't stand it anymore. She's like, it was me, I'm sorry. And she explains everything. She's healed. It was great news for her. But Jairus gets some terrible news. Verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Jesus couldn't get to his house quick enough. The father is dejected. He's crushed. His fear, the fear of losing his daughter, has just been realized. The people who came from the house, I think they showed the level of faith when they said, why bother or why trouble the teacher anymore? She's dead now. There's nothing that he can do. That's the message that they're communicating. In their mind, she was dead. What could anyone do? What could even Jesus do? If she was alive, yeah, maybe there was a chance. But she was dead. But Jesus, he directs his attention to the Father, and he says, don't be afraid, just believe. I think the newer translation, so right up there, you see on the screen, you see in verse 36, the first word, you see overhearing. Okay? That is actually, when the NIV made the translation update, when they did an edition update, 2000, recent, 12, 11 or something like that, they changed some words that I don't like. And this is one of the cases. They chose to go with the word overhearing. But the better word actually is, if you look at some of the older versions of the NIV, it actually says this word instead, ignoring. So instead of overhearing what they said, Jesus ignores what they said. He basically ignores what the news that people brought. It's like, why do you care? So he redirects his attention to the Father and says, don't be afraid, just believe. The word ignoring is basically this idea of refusing to listen. So he's saying, hey, don't listen. Refuse to listen to what they're saying. Look at me. Do not be afraid. Just believe. That is the message that he has for the Father. Hey, remember why you sought me out. Don't forget what caused you to come out and reach out to me, and why we are on the way to your house. You believed that I could heal your daughter. This does not change that at all. I can still do it. You have to believe. The word believe actually in the Greek is the same word as that we translate as trust and faith. Trust, faith, believe. In the Greek, it's the same word that we use. It means the same. To believe means to trust. It means to have faith. So he's reminding him. He's saying, ignore the people that just brought you this news. Ignore them. Refuse to listen to that message. Just believe. So Jesus takes, at this moment, the crowd kind of disperses. He doesn't let them come anymore. He takes Peter, James, and John with him. And then they go to the house. And when they get to the house, there's crying and wailing. In Jewish custom, there were such things as professional mourners. They were hired to come and cry and wail. Okay. How would you like that job? Your job is simply to go and just cry. And just wail, meaning like kind of a loud, like sorrowful, like, oh, why this? Something like that. So they were hired to come. And why would they do that? I don't know. Maybe to help people, right? Kind of get that started a little bit. I don't know. But that was part of their custom. People were hired to do that. Now, these people, when they go and they see a body, a lifeless body, they know. I mean, they've done this before. They know what a lifeless body looks like. So when Jesus comes and he says to them, the child is not dead, but is asleep, they laugh at Jesus. Did you know people laughed at Jesus? If people laugh at us, we can take comfort. They also laughed at Jesus. Not just here, but they also laughed at him during the trials after he was arrested. When he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. They're like, what are you talking about? It took us 40 years to build this temple. And you're going to raise it up in 3 days? They kind of mock him. They laughed at Jesus. Why all this commotion and wailing? Child is not dead, but asleep. A lot of scholars are trying to figure out what Jesus meant by these words. Child is not dead, but asleep. There are times in the Gospels when Jesus refers to, alludes to death with the word sleep. Okay? So people are trying to understand here. Is Jesus talking about the fact that she's just asleep? Is he using sleep as, as a word for, or death as a, word for sleeping? That she wasn't really dead, but she was just sleeping in some kind of a coma or something like that. For me, when I look at the whole scene, and when I look at the professional wailers or the mourners that are there crying, and when the fact that they laugh at Jesus by this statement, I believe that she was dead. That she wasn't in some kind of coma, that she wasn't in some kind of state where she was quote unquote sleeping, but she was literally dead. He tells them all to leave. So Peter, James, and John, right? Parents, they're there in the room. And he does something. Verse 41. Jesus takes her by the hand and said to her, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. Verse 42. Once again, an instant healing. At this, they were completely astonished. Now, on the other side to the demon-possessed guy that was healed, Jesus says, go and tell the people what God has done. Here, what does he say? Don't tell anybody. Once again, why? Right? Why does in one situation Jesus says to tell, and in other cases he says do not tell? This is a critical junction actually in Jesus' ministry. There's what people call the public ministry and the private ministry. And there's this transition that Jesus takes place. He comes, the crowds are like all amazed, but they begin to reject him. And so Jesus says, you know what, for you guys, you had your chance, but now I'm going to focus my attention to those who believe. And in John's gospel, actually, it happens chapter 11 and 12, right in that period. Jesus shifts now to his disciples, and he does ministry to them in preparation of his departure, which is Easter, which is what we will be celebrating in a few weeks. Peter, James, and John, these guys, they were part of the inner circle of Jesus. They were with him here, they were with him in Transfiguration, they're with him in the garden, right? All the disciples are with him in the garden, but he takes these three and he goes a little bit further in. So these guys have just witnessed calming of the storm, healing of a demon-possessed man, healing a woman by doing nothing, but healing a woman who was bleeding for 12 years, and now raising someone from the dead. This all took place within 24 hours. In their mind, they're thinking, who is this Jesus? I don't think words can adequately describe or explain. It can only be understood through the lens of faith. The faith of the bleeding woman who believed that Jesus was more than capable to heal her, who knew that just touching his clothes was enough. The synagogue leader who believed that Jesus could heal his daughter, that Jesus' touch was enough. Faith caused these individuals to reach out to Jesus. In the last couple months, we've been looking at this idea of faith. Faith caused these individuals to reach out to Jesus. Whether we seek these types of encounters and experiences today, whether you believe it happens or not today, whether you personally have experienced some significant thing, whatever the circumstance, sometimes it's like these people, they're at the end of their options. They've exhausted everything, and here they are with no other way to go, nowhere to turn, and then they will reach out to Jesus. Some of us are like that. We try on our own forever, but eventually we're just like, man, Jesus, I need your help. Some of us are more through experience or whatever. Jesus is the first person that you might turn to. When my parents were younger and in Korea, before I was born, one of the things that my parents did was, when they were sick, they didn't go to the hospital. They went to the church. They went to receive prayer. Now, they probably didn't have the money to go to the hospital in the first place, but they made it a habit. Whenever they were sick, they would go to the church and ask a pastor. There was a particular pastor who had a huge impact, I think, on our family's life. She prayed, and my parents were restored. They encountered and experienced that back in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, right after they got married. My parents were, my dad and mom, they would tell us stories, that one day my mom was so sick, my dad would literally piggyback her, and not to the hospital, but to the church to receive prayer. So that's kind of the faith that they demonstrated to my sisters and us. And so for us, when something is going on, when we're faced with things, it's natural for us to just cry out in prayer. Now, obviously, when medical emergencies come up, we do go. We're not like certain religious groups where we don't believe in medical treatments. But we do. But we always balance that with prayer. Faith is one of those things where to each of us, we're all at different points, I think, on this faith journey. Some of us are more newer. We haven't really, been involved or seen too many like miracles or healings or anything like that. Encountered that. We don't have the depth of relationship with Jesus because we've only been Christians for a few years. Some of us, it's been a lifetime. For me, it's been ever since I was in my mother's womb, we went to church. And I grew up in a Christian family. So we're all in a different place. But for these people, faith caused them to reach out to Jesus. We're going to take a pause from this series for at least a couple of weeks, because next week is Palm Sunday, and then we have Easter and coming up. But I want us to kind of go back here. Missional church that enables people to mature in Jesus. When we try to figure out who Jesus is, we looked at all of these, I think, the healings, the demonstration of his power and his authority. One thing we didn't really look at is his teachings, which we'll come back to. The way that Jesus taught even was so different and unique. And the things that he taught was so different and unique as well. But as we look at this, and as we kind of take a pause and wrap up this first part of the series, faith caused these people to reach out to Jesus. Where are you on that journey of faith? What are you facing? What are you facing in your life? Are you trying to do it on your own? Are you using your own resources? Are you like that woman who is exhausting all of her resources, whether it's financial or whether it's emotional? Are you exhausting all of these things instead of reaching out to Jesus? These two people have very similar things. They both reached out. The woman, I go back to her. She said, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. That kind of faith is the kind of faith that I would love to see come into you and I, into our lives. To have that kind of audacity of that faith. Because with that kind of faith, you and I can make a difference. With that kind of faith, you and I, we can move mountains. With that kind of faith, we can turn this world upside down.